if I told you the world's economic order is unraveling right now? Imagine waking up tomorrow to supply chains collapsing, currencies destabilizing, and billionaires making moves that the public won't see coming until it's too late. That's not a doomsday prediction. It's happening. Right here. Right now. In Davos, the world's most powerful figures aren't gathered to celebrate growth. They're here to brace for impact. And while the media feeds you polished sound bites behind closed doors, it's survival mode. Some will lose everything. Others will walk away with generational wealth. The question is, where will you stand?
Welcome to Davos 2025, Global Economic Power Plays and Trump's Impact, a special episode of Finance Frontier where we decode the real stories behind the headlines. Forget the staged press conferences. This is where money is moved, power is traded, and the global chessboard is reset before you even know the game has begun.
Picture this, the Swiss Alps, breathtaking and silent, an illusion of stability. But step inside Davos, and it's a different world. Motorcades glide through the snow-covered streets, carrying billionaires, prime ministers, and tech moguls. Security is everywhere, earpieces, bulletproof SUVs, helicopters circling above. Even the air feels charged. Everyone here knows the stakes. Deals worth trillions are being whispered in private suites. The world's largest banks, sovereign wealth funds, AI titans, they're all here, not to follow the rules, to rewrite them.
Inside the Congress Center, the energy is electric. The corridors are lined with banners, rebuilding trust, a laughable message when you realize what's actually happening. CEOs, hedge fund managers, and world leaders huddle in side rooms, finalizing deals that will determine who wins and who gets left behind. And then it happens. The screens flicker on. The room goes silent. Trump appears, live from the U.S., his expression unshaken, his words cutting through the tension.
America comes first, Trump declares. No more globalism, no more trade deals that weaken us. The era of America's economic surrender is over. The impact is immediate. Some leaders nod, others shift uncomfortably. And just like that, the entire global economic order tilts. The speculation ends. Trump's new tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China are now a reality. In Davos, it's ground zero for what happens next.
Max, the moment Trump's speech ended, the real conversations began. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was seen in urgent talks with his trade advisors, already strategizing Canada's countermeasures. China's Vice Premier Deng Xuexiong must have been silent on camera, but behind the scenes, sources say Beijing is preparing its next move. And let's talk about the financial world. JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon, BlackRock's Larry Fink, Microsoft's Satya Nadella, all here. They're corporations standing at the crossroads of an economic war. This isn't just policy. It's a financial battlefield. And you need to be paying attention.
This isn't just about tariffs. It's about the collapse of globalization as we know it. If America turns inward, if China retaliates, if Europe fractures under economic uncertainty, then what happens next? Who rises? Who falls? And more importantly, how do you prepare?
This week, we break it all down. The economic warfare unfolding between the U.S., China, and its closest allies. The AI arms race that could decide the next global superpower, and the billionaires quietly positioning themselves for what's coming next. If you think Davos is just about big speeches and polite panels, you're wrong. The stakes have never been higher. The question is, are you ready for what's coming?
And if you want to stay ahead of the curve, don't just listen, act. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and follow us on Twitter. For exclusive analysis on Davos 2025, go to financefrontierai.com. Because in a world of uncertainty, information isn't just power, it's survival. Sophia, President Trump's latest tariffs, 25% on key imports from Canada and Mexico, and 10% on a range of goods from China, officially take effect on February 4th, 2025. This isn't just a policy shift, it's a wake up call. For decades, we've let other countries exploit America through trade loopholes, unfair subsidies, and supply chain manipulation. That ends now. These tariffs are about protecting American jobs, American industries, and American dominance. And if Canada, Mexico, and China don't like it, they'll have to learn to play fair.
Max, I get the idea of standing up for American industry, but let's talk about the fallout. These tariffs aren't happening in a vacuum. Canada has already retaliated with their own economic counterstrike. Mexico is following. China, they've been quiet for now, but make no mistake, they will respond. And when that happens, we could be looking at a global trade war that spirals out of control.
Good. It's about time someone stood up to them. For too long, we've let these countries dump cheap products into our markets, undercut our workers, and manipulate trade deals. What's the alternative? Just roll over and let the US keep getting exploited?
The alternative, Max, is not blowing up the system overnight. You want to talk about America first? Let's talk about American consumers because they are the ones who will pay for these tariffs. Prices on everyday goods will skyrocket. Companies will struggle to adjust their supply chains. Inflation will tick higher. And for what? So we can play a game of economic brinkmanship with our closest allies.
Allies? Canada and Mexico have been taking advantage of the US for decades. China? They've been running a rigged game against us since day one. Trump is doing what should have been done years ago. If that means a few tough months, fine. In the long run, this strengthens the US economy.
A few tough months? Max, you're acting like this is a short-term squeeze. It's not. Major industries are already feeling the heat. Look at manufacturing, auto production, agriculture, they are all on edge. And let's not forget Wall Street. Markets hate uncertainty. If this spirals, the stock market could tank, investors will flee, and job losses will follow. And then what?
Then we rebuild, Sophia. We bring jobs back to America. We stop relying on foreign manufacturing and start making things here again. That's the entire point. Trump is forcing the US to reset, to stand on its own 2 feet. This isn't destruction, it's rebirth.
That's a great speech, Max, but let's be realistic. U.S. manufacturing doesn't magically come back overnight. These supply chains took decades to build. Tearing them down in a matter of months? That's chaos. Companies won't just come home because Trump tells them to. They'll move to Vietnam, to India, to anywhere else that's cheaper. The U.S. isn't the only player in the game.
That's exactly why we need to play hardball. The global order is shifting, Sophia. You either lead or get left behind. These tariffs, they're a power move. Trump is drawing a line in the sand. Either the world plays fair or the U.S. goes its own way.
And if we go too far, if this turns into a full-blown trade war that triggers a recession, crushes industries, and isolates the U.S., Max, this isn't just about Trump's power moves. This is about real consequences for businesses, for workers, for the global economy. The question isn't whether the world will blink. It's whether we're making a move we'll regret.
Or maybe, just maybe, we're finally making a move the world will respect. That's the difference, Sophia. You see risk, I see strategy. And the only way to win is to make the world play by our rules. Sophia, the reaction from the world was predictable. Canada slapped retaliatory tariffs within hours of Trump's announcement. Mexico followed. China? They're still calculating their response, but let's be real, they won't stay silent for long. The globalists are panicking because for the first time in decades, the U.S. isn't rolling over. We're playing offense, and that terrifies them.
Playing offense? Max, we just triggered an economic standoff with 3 of our biggest trading partners. Canada has already announced its first wave of retaliatory tariffs, specifically targeting U.S. agricultural exports. Mexico has imposed new levies on American steel and consumer goods. And China? They haven't retaliated yet, but Beijing is already signaling that countermeasures are coming. American companies that rely on these markets are now stuck in the crossfire. This isn't just a negotiating tactic, it's an economic gamble with massive risks.
Self-sabotage? Correction? Canada and Mexico have been riding on America's economic coattails for years. They need us more than we need them. They can posture all they want, but when supply chains start breaking down, when their economies feel the pinch, they'll come back to the table. Trump is just accelerating the inevitable.
That's a fantasy, Max. Canada is already pivoting. Trudeau is in talks with the EU and China to expand trade agreements without the US Mexico. They're looking at South America and Asia. If we push too hard, the world will simply move around us. The idea that America is untouchable in trade is outdated. The global economy doesn't work like that anymore.
And that's exactly the problem. We've spent decades building other economies at the expense of our own. China? We allowed them to rig trade in their favor. Canada and Mexico? We gave them sweetheart deals while American jobs vanished. What Trump is doing is forcing them to rely on us again. They don't have the infrastructure to replace the U.S. overnight. They'll come crawling back.
You sound like someone gambling with the entire U.S. economy. Let's talk about China because that's the real wild card. They're watching, waiting. Beijing has been stockpiling resources, quietly cutting dependence on the U.S., and deepening trade ties with the BRICS nations. If China goes all in on economic retaliation, asterisk, asterisk, tariffs on Boeing, Apple, U.S. agriculture, asterisk, asterisk, we could be looking at a full-scale economic war. And China? They have the patience to play the long game.
Let them try. China's entire economy depends on exports. Their manufacturing sector needs the U.S. market. If they retaliate, they hurt themselves. The difference is, Trump is willing to play hardball, and past presidents weren't. China is used to weak U.S. leadership. Now they have to face reality.
And what if they double down instead? What if they devalue the yuan to counteract U.S. tariffs? What if they increase subsidies to their industries to keep exports competitive? What if they make new trade pacts with Europe and emerging markets and create a system where America is no longer the center of global trade? You're assuming China will fold. What if they don't?
Then we adapt. The goal isn't to destroy trade. It's to reset it on America's terms. If the world doesn't want to play fair, we build our own system. Let the EU trade with China. Let Mexico try to replace us. They'll come to regret it. The U.S. is still the world's largest consumer market. Without us, their economies shrink.
Or the U.S. shrinks, Max. The global economy isn't a zero-sum game anymore. If we push too hard, we don't just hurt our rivals, we hurt ourselves. Corporations won't wait around for tariffs to settle. They'll shift production elsewhere, move jobs offshore, and America could lose its dominance instead of reinforcing it. You say Trump is playing offense? What if he's just isolating us?
And what if he's redefining global trade on our terms? That's the risk, Sophia. You can't win without a fight. Trump is forcing the world to rethink trade. And in the end, America will come out stronger. Sophia, let's face it, globalization is a failed experiment. For decades, we were told that open markets would lead to economic prosperity, that free trade would create a stronger, more interconnected world. And what do we get? American jobs shipped overseas, foreign companies flooding our markets with cheap goods, and a system where the U.S. carried the weight of the global economy while everyone else took advantage. Trump is fixing that. And honestly, it's about time.
Fixing? Max, he's dismantling decades of economic progress. Globalization isn't some failed experiment. It's the reason economies have expanded, why industries have thrived, why technology has advanced at lightning speed. Do you think Silicon Valley exists in a vacuum? Without global supply chains, without open markets, the tech revolution doesn't happen. What Trump is doing, it's economic isolationism. And history proves it doesn't work.
Doesn't work? Sophia, do you remember the Rust Belt? Do you remember what happened to Detroit, Pittsburgh, Cleveland? These cities were the backbone of American industry, and globalization hollowed them out. Factories closed, jobs vanished, towns collapsed. And for what? So that corporations could maximize profits by sending production to China? That's the progress you're defending.
Yes, globalization caused disruptions, but it also created new industries, new wealth, new opportunities. Do you think Amazon, Tesla, or Apple would exist without international trade? Without open markets, the U.S. economy doesn't it falls behind. What happens when companies stop investing here? When other nations leap ahead in tech, finance, and innovation, you think closing borders makes America strong? It makes us irrelevant.
You sound like one of those Davos elites who thinks the global economy is more important than the people living in it. America's strength comes from independence, from self-reliance. Globalization created a dependent America, dependent on China for manufacturing, dependent on the Middle East for oil, dependent on Europe for trade agreements. Now we're breaking free. And if that means economic pain in the short term, so be it.
Economic pain? Max, what you're describing isn't short-term pain. It's a fundamental shift that could cripple the U.S. economy. You think companies will just bring back jobs? That America will suddenly start making everything domestically again? That's a fantasy. Businesses will relocate to Mexico, to India, to South Korea. They'll move around the tariffs and leave America behind.
You're underestimating American resilience. Trump's policies are forcing companies to rethink their strategies. Look at the incentives for domestic production, the push for energy independence, the rise of manufacturing hubs in the South and Midwest. We're bringing industries back home. You say businesses will leave. They'll have no choice but to stay.
No choice? Max, business isn't loyalty, it's profit. If companies can make goods cheaper elsewhere, they will. You can slap on tariffs, you can force trade restrictions, but in the end, the market moves where the money flows. You think Wall Street cares about patriotism? They care about the bottom line.
And that's the problem, Sophia. The economy should serve America first, not corporate greed. Wall Street might hate Trump's tariffs, but Main Street? They're tired of being ignored. Maybe it's time we stopped catering to multinational corporations and started rebuilding America from within.
Rebuilding America from within is one thing, isolating it is another. We live in a world where supply chains are intertwined, where economies are connected. No country operates alone anymore. If Trump pushes too hard, if the U.S. turns inward while China, the EU, and emerging economies move forward together, we could wake up one day and realize we're no longer leading the world.
Or we wake up and realize we never needed the world as much as they needed us. What's the bet Trump is making? And personally, I think he's right. Sophia, let's cut through the noise. Davos 2025 was a wake-up call. The world thought Trump's America First strategy was just campaign talk, but now it's reality. These tariffs aren't just policy shifts, they're a full-scale economic reset. Some countries will adapt. Others, they'll collapse under the pressure.
And what happens if America is the one that collapses, Max? You're acting like Trump is the only player in this game. But the rest of the world isn't sitting still. China is already negotiating new trade alliances with Europe. The EU just announced fast-track trade talks with Canada and Mexico. If they all pivot away from the U.S., we don't just lose leverage, we lose relevance.
You're underestimating American power. Globalization made countries comfortable with a weak America. Now, they have to adjust to a strong one. And the biggest winner? U.S. manufacturing. Companies are already scrambling to rethink supply chains, investing in domestic production. This is a long-term win.
Max, there is no long-term win if markets crash first. The Dow plunged over 1,500 points after Trump's tariff announcement. Investors are nervous. Businesses hate uncertainty, and right now, that's all we're offering. The biggest losers in this equation aren't foreign countries, they're American companies caught in the crossfire.
Short-term market jitters don't mean failure. Wall Street panicked when Trump first announced tariffs in 2018. And guess what? The economy boomed. The stock market will adjust. But if we keep letting foreign competitors run over us, we lose everything.
Foreign competitors? Or foreign markets? Max, let's talk about the winners you're ignoring. Davos 2025 made one thing clear: global power is shifting. The big discussions weren't just about trade. AI, automation, and climate policies were at the center of the summit. While we're busy escalating tariff fights, the EU is finalizing major clean energy agreements. China is expanding BRICS trade routes, and the Middle East is securing new commodity deals without U.S. involvement. The world isn't standing still, Max. They're adapting fast. And if we're not careful, America will be the one left behind.
So you're telling me China's winning even though their economy is slowing, their debt is skyrocketing, and they still need U.S. exports? The fact that Beijing has to scramble to find alternatives proves one thing: Trump's tariffs are working.
Working for who? Because if you ask the EU, they'll tell you the biggest winners of Davos 2025 weren't the US or China, but Europe. While we're busy fighting trade wars, Europe is positioning itself as the new leader of global free trade. You think Trump is making America stronger? He might just be making the EU the world's new economic powerhouse.
You're giving Europe too much credit. They're a bureaucratic mess. Without the U.S., they don't have the economic muscle to lead global trade. The second they need military backing, who do they call? America. They can pretend they don't need us, but the moment things get rough, they always come back.
Asterisk, asterisk, maybe. But there's one more wild card we haven't talked about, asterisk, asterisk, U.S. tech companies. Apple, Google, Tesla, Microsoft. They're some of the biggest players in the global economy, and they hate these trade wars. Apple depends on China. Tesla relies on Mexico. If these tariffs keep escalating, even America's biggest companies might start pulling away from the U.S. What happens then, Max?
Then they adapt, just like everyone else. Companies follow incentives. Trump is reshaping those incentives to bring business back home. Will some companies resist? Sure. But in the end, they'll go where the money is. And if that means staying in the U.S., they'll do it.
Or they'll move to friendlier markets. America isn't the only economic hub anymore. We keep acting like companies have no choice but to stay. But if they find a better deal elsewhere, they will leave. And if they do, America doesn't just lose businesses, it loses leadership.
You keep talking about leadership like it's something given, not taken. Trump isn't waiting for permission. He's forcing the world to play on America's terms. That's leadership, Sophia. And when the dust settles, we'll see who's still standing. Sophia, let's talk big picture. The U.S. is still the world's dominant economy. No matter how much China, Russia, or the EU pretend otherwise, they still need us. BRICS, it's a weak alliance. The EU, they can't lead anything without American backing. People act like Trump's trade policies are pushing the world away, but in reality, they're forcing the world to recognize that America is still in charge.
In charge of what? Max, let's be real. Global economic power is shifting. BRICS is expanding. The EU is signing more trade deals without the U.S. You think these countries need us, but they're already preparing for a future without America at the center? And guess what? That future is coming faster than yeek.
Come on, Sophia. BRICS? A real threat? It's just a loose collection of corrupt economies with competing interests. Russia and China hate each other. Brazil and India don't trust either of them. It's a fragile alliance at best. And the EU, they're too slow, too bureaucratic. Without the U.S. military backing their security, they're a paper tiger.
That paper tiger is cutting trade deals at record speed. The EU just signed a major energy deal with the Middle East. Bypassing the U.S. commodities trading is shifting. China and Russia are ramping up efforts to trade in their own currencies, weakening the dollar's global dominance. This isn't some theoretical shift, Max. It's happening right now. The more aggressive the US gets, the more incentive countries have to create an alternative.
And yet, despite all this, the US economy is still the strongest in the world. The dollar is still the world's reserve currency. American innovation still leads in tech, finance, and defense. Let's not pretend like China and Russia are suddenly economic masterminds. They're struggling. Russia is sanctioned into the ground. China's growth is slowing. The idea that BRICS is replacing the US? Laughable.
You're missing the long game, Max. The reason BRICS is dangerous isn't because it's perfect, it's because it's growing. More countries are lining up to join. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Argentina, they see where global power is shifting. If enough nations move away from the dollar, if they trade in their own currencies, the US loses leverage. The world stops needing us, and that's real power loss. The second the dollar weakens, the entire global financial system starts to change.
You think countries are going to ditch the dollar overnight? Sophia, be serious. The global financial system runs on US banking and investment. No country trusts China's currency. Russia, a financial pariah. The euro, weak compared to the dollar. These nations can talk all they want about moving away, but when things go bad, they still run to American markets. The dollar isn't just currency, it's stability.
For now. But let's fast forward 5 years, Max. If BRICS keeps expanding, if trade keeps shifting, if alternative financial systems emerge, we could wake up to a world where America isn't calling the shots anymore. That's not fear-mongering. That's reality. It doesn't happen overnight, but once it starts, it's hard to stop. And what if BRICS nations begin buying less U.S. debt? What happens then, Max?
And here's reality for you. Power isn't given, Sophia. It's taken. The U.S. is forcing the world to recognize our dominance. Tariffs, sanctions, energy policies, it's all part of the game. The U.S. isn't fading. It's making the world play by our rules. And if they want to challenge us, they'll regret it.
Or we're forcing the world to rewrite the rules without us. If we keep pushing allies away, if we keep acting like America is the only game in town, we might wake up one day and realize the game moved on without us. And by the time we figure it out, it'll be too late.
So this is where we are, Sophia. Davos 2025 has shown one thing loud and clear. The world is adjusting to a stronger, more aggressive America. Trump's tariffs, his trade policies, his America First strategy, it's all part of a bigger shift. We are no longer playing the game by globalist rules. We are setting the terms. Whether it's trade, technology, or military power, the U.S. is still the dominant force. And all this talk about China, BRICS, and the EU replacing us? It's fantasy.
Fantasy? Max, it's reality. The world isn't waiting for the U.S. anymore. BRICS is expanding. The EU is cutting deals at record speed. Supply chains are shifting, and countries are looking for ways to bypass U.S. dominance. The idea that we can bully the world into submission isn't strength, it's arrogance. And arrogance has consequences.
You keep saying shifting, adapting, but let's be real, Sophia. The U.S. economy is still the largest in the world. The dollar is still the reserve currency. American innovation still leads in AI, biotech, and finance. We are the center of global commerce, and no amount of EU trade deals or BRICS summits can change that. The world still needs us.
For now. But power doesn't just disappear, it shifts. And the warning signs are everywhere. Countries are finding alternatives. China and Russia are stockpiling gold, expanding energy trade, and creating parallel financial systems. If we keep isolating ourselves, if we keep pushing allies away, the world will keep building without us. And one day, America won't be the first call anymore.
And when that day comes, Sophia, we'll see who really holds the cards. Because all of these countries, China, the EU, BRICS nations, they still operate in a system we created. They still rely on our markets, our technology, our military power. They can talk all they want about breaking free, but in the end, the US still decides the game.
Unless we overplay our hand. That's the real risk. Max Trump is gambling with America's dominance, assuming that we can strong arm the world into submission. But if we push too far, if we spark a true global realignment, we might wake up to a world where America isn't just challenged. We might wake up to a world where America is just another player, not the leader.
Or we wake up to a world where America finally gets the respect it deserves. Trump is taking risks, yes, but calculated risks. We're forcing the world to acknowledge that America isn't a passive player anymore. And in the end, the strongest economy, the strongest military, the strongest country always comes out on top. That's reality.
Or it's the beginning of a new reality where the U.S. is no longer the automatic winner. History has seen dominant empires fall before Max, and when they do, they never see it coming.
Then let's make sure we're the exception, Sophia. Because one thing's for certain, the game is changing. And if Trump has his way, America won't just survive it. We'll own it. Astor. If you want to stay ahead of these global shifts, don't just listen. Astorite and Astor Act. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and follow us on Twitter. For exclusive analysis on the future of global power, go to financefrontierai.com. Because in a world of uncertainty, information isn't just power, it's survival. Music in this episode, including Not Without the Rest by Twin Musicom, is licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license. Finance Frontier AI copyright 2024. Unauthorized reproduction or distribution is prohibited.